Hi, Islamic Dad here. I'm going to do a video on a subject that's kind of tangential to narcissism, and that is the midlife crisis. First off, for those who don't believe that there's such a thing as a midlife crisis, just hit stop. Go watch something else. I don't care. For those that are either open-minded or have known people who have gone through a midlife crisis, it is not a pleasant experience to see someone go through. I have known two people personally who have gone through very drastic midlife crisis, and I've known a couple more through friends, through the workplace, and they all follow the same general pattern that you guess from the term, and probably from hearing other people either talk about it or know people who've gone through the experience. Basically, the midlife crisis is typically someone will be between the ages of 35 and 45. Very often 40 right on the dot. And they'll reach a point in their life where, for whatever reason, they just become unhappy with who they are and unhappy with the life that they're living. And where that fits in with the narcissism is that a couple of the people that I've known who've gone through a midlife crisis picked, their new persona that they picked to become, or created, if you will, met the criteria for narcissistic personality disorder, or at the very least, narcissistic traits. So, as I said, probably back in the first video I created, I really couldn't care less about people's, nitpicking definition as far as narcissistic, personality disorder versus narcissistic traits and blah, blah, blah. For me, my perspective is, if it walks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. And that has been my approach with, people with narcissism, is that if they're meeting all the criteria, over a, period of time, then I think it's appropriate to say, okay, this person's a narcissist, especially because it gives you a model in which to approach that person and handle them, to minimize the damage that they do to you, to kind of set up some defenses as far as either gray rock or something else, where you wouldn't do that necessarily unless you had decided, okay, this person's a narcissist and I need to treat them as a narcissist. And so my perspective on people being perfectly normal, and then, say they turn 40 and they go cuckoo crazy and they're like, oh, I used to be this normal suburban spouse, but now I'm going to be party spouse, or, party person, and pretend I'm single again. Woo. When they go through their midlife crisis, and if that new person that they decide to become meets all the criteria and the traits of a narcissist, I'm going to call them a narcissist, because that is how they're approaching and interacting with me, and it is how I need to treat them in order to be effective and also to protect myself. And so, this idea that only someone who, experienced the, childhood trauma, and then slowly, formed the false self, and then started exhibiting more of these narcissistic traits as they got older, like late teens and 20s. To say those are the only people that we can say are narcissists, to me that's ridiculous. I mean, if I meet somebody and they're exhibiting narcissistic behavior and meeting multiple criteria for the disorder, I don't care when they started acting that way. I don't care if they started acting that way yesterday, and I don't care if they started acting that way 30 years ago. It does not matter. And so that coming back, that's why I wanted to bring up the issue of the midlife crisis, because for whatever reason, there seems to be some overlap. Now, not everyone who goes through a midlife crisis creates a persona with narcissistic traits. In my personal experience, I would put the percentage at 25 to 35%, which isn't huge, but I think that's still much larger than I think like the 1 to 5% that is typically given for like the percentage of people in the broader population that are narcissists. So the fact that you may have almost 1/3 of people that go through a midlife crisis create a persona that meets these narcissistic traits, I think that that's worth noting. I mean, I think that it's also a way to a model to approach people that go through a midlife crisis and go in that direction, because to some extent they're doing the same thing. Whereas you have like, say, a child go through experiences of toxic shame. They don't have good coping mechanisms, so they create the false self to cope with the toxic shame. That is one way that they might create this false self. Whereas with the person going through a midlife crisis, they might be 40 years old and go through some I'd say mental experience, just something that just snaps. Like just one day it's like someone hit a light switch, and at that point they quickly over the course of maybe a couple days, maybe a couple weeks, scramble to form this new persona. Or in this case we could think of it as the mask. So it's just simply, whereas the classic narcissist creates this mask, as maybe a 5-year-old, maybe the person who's going through a midlife crisis creates their mask at the age of 40. And so it's a way for them to then go out into the world and they feel protected. And I know that, very much with my ex-wife, who went through a midlife crisis, that was very much one of her motivations that she kind of stated, was that she wanted to feel in control and powerful, so that basically she couldn't get hurt. I don't, we weren't living in a war zone or anything. I don't know what she was worried about, but again, like, it was just, that is where she came from. So she created this malignant narcissist persona who is obsessed with power, control, confrontation, dominating everyone that she can around her, just to, I feel like ultimately below feeling powerful is feeling some type of security. So anyways, I just wanted to throw that out there because, I think that, again, this is like one of those weird areas where I think that there's a very interesting overlap between the people who have a midlife crisis and then choose to create a persona that has narcissistic traits. And that's something, again, I don't think people talk about or even mention, but I think it's worthwhile, because I know just in the comments there have been people who have mentioned, yeah, my spouse went through a midlife crisis and they became this horrible narcissist, whereas before we'd been married 14 years and we had a very, great, loving, stable marriage. And so this does happen, and I think it's a lot more common than people would suspect. So hopefully this has been helpful. Thanks.